What happens when one of Hollywood's biggest stars walks into what should be a routine morning show interview, only to find himself face-to-face with a host who seems determined to destroy his reputation on live television? The tension in Studio 1 Amper was so thick you could cut it with a knife, and what started as a simple promotional appearance for Brad Pitt's latest film quickly spiraled into one of the most explosive confrontations in morning television history. The cameras were rolling, millions were watching, and nobody, not even the seasoned production crew, was prepared for what was about to unfold. Make sure you subscribe and drop a comment below, because this story will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about live television. The morning started like any other at the Good Morning America studios in Times Square. Brad Pitt had arrived early, going through the usual routine of hair and makeup, chatting casually with the production assistants who were clearly struck by his presence. He seemed relaxed, even jovial, as he reviewed his talking points about his upcoming thriller. The film, a psychological drama about corporate corruption, was supposed to be the main focus of the interview. Pitt had done hundreds of these promotional spots over the years, and this one seemed no different from the rest. But something was off about George Stephanopoulos that morning. Multiple crew members later reported that he seemed unusually tense during the pre-show briefing, constantly checking his notes and making last-minute changes to his question cards. His usual professional demeanor appeared strained, almost agitated. When asked if everything was all right, he simply waved off concerns and muttered something about wanting to make sure they covered all the important topics. As the show went live, the first few minutes proceeded normally. Robin Roberts handled the news segments while George prepared for what was scheduled to be a light-hearted interview with one of America's most beloved actors. The producers had planned for a 7-minute segment, plenty of time to discuss the new film, maybe touch on some personal projects, and wrap up with the usual promotional material. Nobody anticipated that those 7 minutes would turn into a career-defining moment for both men. And now we're joined by Academy Award winner Brad Pitt. George announced as the cameras switched to the interview area. "Brad, great to have you back on the show." His smile seemed forced, almost mechanical, as he gestured toward the comfortable chairs where countless celebrities had sat for friendly chats over the years. "Thanks for having me, George," Brad replied, settling into his seat with that characteristic, easy confidence that had made him a star. "Always a pleasure to be here. So, let's talk about your new film," George began, but there was something in his tone that immediately caught Brad's attention. "It deals with corporate corruption, powerful people covering up their mistakes. Seems like a theme that might hit close to home for someone in your position." Brad's eyebrows lifted slightly. The comment was oddly pointed for what was supposed to be a promotional interview. "Well, I think corruption is something that affects all levels of society, not just Hollywood. The film explores how ordinary people can get caught up in systems. But you would know about systems protecting powerful people, wouldn't you?" George interrupted, his voice carrying an edge that made several crew members exchange worried glances. "I mean, given your own experiences with certain situations that have been, shall we say, carefully managed by very expensive legal teams and public relations firms." The studio fell uncomfortably quiet. Brad's relaxed posture shifted almost imperceptibly, his media-trained instincts kicking in. "I'm not sure I follow what you're getting at, George. Are we here to discuss the film or something else?" "Oh, I think we both know what we're here to discuss," George replied, leaning forward in his chair with the aggressive posture of a prosecutor rather than a morning show host. "See, I've been doing some digging, and I think the American people deserve to know the truth about certain allegations that have been floating around Hollywood for years. Allegations that seem to get buried under piles of money and non-disclosure agreements." Brad's jaw tightened, though he maintained his composure. "George, I came here to talk about my work, not to participate in some kind of ambush interview. If you have questions about the film, I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, I think we might want to reconsider how we're spending this time." "Ambush." George's voice rose slightly, drawing sharp looks from the control room where producers were frantically trying to figure out how to handle the situation. I call it journalism. Real journalism. The kind that asks the hard questions instead of just lobbing softballs at celebrities who think they're above accountability." The tension was escalating rapidly, and veteran crew members who had worked on thousands of interviews could sense that something unprecedented was happening. This wasn't the typical celebrity interview gone slightly off track. This felt personal, vindictive, even as if George had some deeper agenda that had nothing to do with entertainment journalism. "Look, George," Brad said, his voice remaining calm, but with a subtle warning undertone. "I don't know what's gotten into you today, but this isn't professional. You're making accusations without any basis, and frankly, it's beneath both of us." "Beneath us?" George's laugh was harsh and humorless. "That's rich, coming from someone who spent decades hiding behind carefully crafted public images. While the real story gets swept under the rug. Tell me, Brad, how much money has your team spent making certain stories disappear? How many people have been paid to stay quiet about what really goes on behind those mansion gates? The cameras continued rolling, capturing every uncomfortable moment as millions of viewers watched one of morning television's most respected hosts launch what could only be described as a verbal assault on his guest. Brad's publicist, watching from the green room, was already on her phone with the show's executive producer, demanding to know what was happening and why the interview hadn't been stopped. Brad's eyes flashed with something darker than annoyance. The diplomatic mask he had worn for decades of interviews was beginning to crack. You want to talk about what really goes on behind closed doors? George, let's talk about it. Let's talk about how someone with your background, someone who is supposed to serve the American people with integrity, somehow ends up attacking guests on morning television for ratings. George's face flushed red. He clearly hadn't expected Brad to push back with such precision. Don't you dare question my integrity. I've spent my entire career holding powerful people accountable, which is more than I can say for the entertainment industry's golden boy routine. You've been peddling for 30 years. Accountable. Brad's voice remained steady, but there was steel in it now. Is that what you call this? Because from where I'm sitting, this looks like a man who's forgotten the difference between journalism and character assassination. What happened to you, George? When did you decide that ambushing guests was more important than actual reporting? The control room was in chaos. The executive producer was shouting into her headset, trying to decide whether to cut to commercial or let the disaster continue. The show's legal team was already being contacted, knowing that whatever was happening could result in serious consequences for the network. Meanwhile, social media was exploding as viewers shared clips of the unprecedented confrontation. Want to know what happened to me? George leaned back in his chair, his expression shifting to something almost predatory. I got tired of watching people like you coast through life without ever facing real consequences. You live in your Hollywood bubble, surrounded by yes-men and handlers, while regular people deal with the real world. And when things go wrong, you just throw money at the problem until it disappears. That's an interesting perspective from someone who makes millions reading teleprompters. Brad shot back, his composure finally showing real cracks. Tell me, George, when was the last time you actually investigated anything yourself instead of having a team of researchers hand you talking points? When did you last do any real journalism instead of just performing for cameras? The insult hit its mark. George's carefully maintained television persona completely evaporated. Real journalism. You want to see real journalism? Let's talk about the pattern of behavior that your expensive lawyers have worked so hard to keep out of the headlines. Let's discuss the settlements, the NDAs, the women who were paid to stay silent about experiences they had with Hollywood's supposed nice guy. Brad stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the studio floor. The sudden movement caused camera operators to scramble to keep both men in frame. That's enough. I don't know what sick game you're playing here, but I'm not participating in your delusional fantasy. You're making serious accusations without a shred of evidence, and frankly, it's defamatory. Sit down, George commanded, his voice taking on an authoritative tone he'd perfected during his political career. We're not done here. The American people deserve answers, and you're going to give them whether you like it or not. The American people deserve better than watching you have some kind of public breakdown on television, Brad replied, remaining standing. This isn't journalism, George. This is whatever personal issue you're working through, and I'm not your therapist. George's laugh was bitter and sharp. Personal issue. The only personal issue I have is with celebrities who think they're untouchable. You've spent decades crafting this image of the everyman movie star, the guy who cares about humanitarian causes and social justice. But what about justice for the people who've been hurt by your actions and then silenced by your money? What actions? Brad's voice rose for the first time, genuine anger breaking through his media training. You keep making these vague insinuations, but you haven't presented a single fact. Where's your evidence, George? Where are these alleged victims you claim to be fighting for? Or is this just you projecting your own failures onto someone else? The studio audience, which had been watching in stunned silence, began to murmur among themselves. Some were clearly uncomfortable with the hostile atmosphere, while others seemed fascinated by the raw confrontation unfolding before them. The producers had made the decision to let the segment continue, partly out of curiosity about how far it would go, and partly because they knew this would be television gold. My failures, George's voice cracked slightly, revealing something vulnerable. Beneath the aggression, at least I'm honest about who I am. At least I don't hide behind a fake smile and manufactured charm while manipulating situations to my advantage. You want to talk about evidence? How about we discuss the real reason you're here promoting this particular film about corruption? Seems like perfect timing, doesn't it? A nice little PR move to rehabilitate your image before certain stories come to light. Brad shook his head in disbelief. You're unhinged. Completely unhinged. There are no stories coming to light because there are no stories. You're creating a narrative that exists only in your head, and you're using your platform to spread conspiracy theories and character assassination. Conspiracy theories. George stood up now, matching Brad's posture in what had become a clear standoff. Is that what we're calling investigative journalism now? Or is that just what powerful people call it when someone refuses to be bought off or intimidated into silence? Investigative journalism requires actual investigation. Brad replied coldly. What you're doing is gossip and innuendo dressed up as moral crusading. And the worst part is, you know you don't have anything real. So, you're hoping you can bully me into some kind of admission or reaction that you can spin into a story. The confrontation had reached a boiling point, with both men standing face-to-face across the small interview area. The cameras captured every moment of the unprecedented breakdown in professional decorum as one of Hollywood's biggest stars faced off against one of television journalism's most established figures in what had become less an interview than a public battle of wills. The silence that followed was deafening. For a moment, both men stared at each other across the interview set, the weight of their words hanging in the air like smoke after an explosion. The studio audience had gone completely quiet, sensing they were witnessing something that would be talked about for years to come. Camera operators held their positions, afraid to move and break the spell of this unprecedented moment in television history. You know what your problem is, George. Brad's voice had dropped to a dangerous whisper that somehow carried more menace than shouting. You used to matter. You used to be someone who asked real questions about real issues, but somewhere along the way, you became just another talking head desperate for relevance, willing to destroy people's reputations for a few minutes of viral content. George's face went white, then red as if he'd been physically slapped. How dare you lecture me about relevance? You're nothing but a pretty face who got lucky in Hollywood. You've never had to work for anything real in your entire life. Everything was handed to you on a silver platter, and when things got complicated, you just paid people to make the problems disappear. There you go again with your fantasies, Brad replied, his composure returning as he recognized George's desperation. You keep talking about these payments, these cover-ups, but you can't name a single specific incident because they don't exist. You're fishing, hoping I'll give you something you can twist into a headline. I don't need to fish when the ocean is full of sharks. George shot back, but his metaphor fell flat, revealing the weakness of his position. The truth has a way of coming out, Brad. It always does. And when it does, all your money and all your lawyers won't be able to save your precious reputation. Brad actually laughed, a sound devoid of humor that somehow managed to be more cutting than any insult, my reputation. George, in the last 10 minutes, you've accused me of multiple crimes without evidence, launched personal attacks against a guest who came here in good faith, and basically had a nervous breakdown on live television. Whose reputation do you think is really in danger here? The observation hit home with devastating accuracy. George looked around the studio, as if suddenly realizing where he was and what he'd been doing. The crew members were staring at him, with expressions ranging from shock to pity. His co-hosts, visible in his peripheral vision, looked mortified. The executive producer was frantically signaling from the control room, clearly trying to salvage what was left of the show's credibility. I'm doing my job, George said weakly, but the fight had gone out of his voice. I'm asking the hard questions that nobody else will ask. No, you're not, Brad replied with quiet finality. You're having some kind of personal crisis, and you decided to make me the target. I don't know if it's jealousy, frustration with your own career, or just desperation for attention, but whatever it is, it's not journalism, and it's not professional. George's jaw worked silently for a moment, as if he were trying to find words. That wouldn't come. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. You think you're so much better than everyone else. You think your fame makes you untouchable. I think my work speaks for itself, Brad answered simply. And I think this conversation speaks for itself, too. America just watched you spend 15 minutes trying to destroy someone's reputation based on absolutely nothing but your own paranoid delusions. The words hit George like a physical blow. His shoulders sagged, and for the first time since the interview began, he looked uncertain, almost lost. The transformation was jarring for viewers who were used to seeing him as the confident, authoritative figure who had grilled politicians and world leaders with surgical precision. This interview is over, George said suddenly, his voice cracking. Slightly security. Please escort Mr. Pitt from the building. Brad's eyebrows shot up in genuine surprise. Excuse me, you heard me. You're no longer welcome here. Your behavior has been disruptive and inappropriate, and I'm asking you to leave. The absurdity of the statement seemed to hang in the air. Even the security guards, who had been standing by quietly throughout the confrontation, looked confused about who exactly had been disruptive and inappropriate. My behavior. Brad's voice carried a note of incredulous disbelief. George, are you seriously trying to gaslight the entire viewing audience right now? Everyone just watched you spend 20 minutes making baseless accusations and personal attacks, and now you're claiming I'm the problem. I asked you to leave, George repeated, but his voice lacked conviction. He seemed to realize how his demand sounded, but pride or stubbornness prevented him from backing down. Brad looked directly into the main camera, addressing the audience. With the calm professionalism that George had abandoned, "Ladies and gentlemen, I came here today to talk about a film I'm proud of. A story about corruption and the importance of truth. Instead, I've been subjected to what can only be described as a character assassination attempt by someone who seems to have confused morning television with a kangaroo court. Don't you dare try to spin this," George interjected desperately, but his words sounded hollow after Brad's measured response. "I'm not spinning anything," Brad continued, still speaking to the camera. "I'm simply pointing out that in the last 20 minutes, Mr. Stephanopoulos has made numerous serious accusations without providing a single piece of evidence. He's violated every principle of journalistic integrity and professional conduct. And now he's trying to have me removed for the crime of defending myself against his unfounded attacks." The executive producer finally made the decision that should have been made minutes earlier. "We're going to commercial," she announced through the control room speakers, and immediately the familiar jingle began playing as cameras switched away from the interview area, but the damage was already done. Social media was exploding with clips of the confrontation, and news outlets were already preparing stories about George Stephanopoulos' meltdown on live television. The irony wasn't lost on anyone that in trying to destroy Brad Pitt's reputation, George had instead demolished his own credibility in the most public way possible. As the commercial break provided a temporary reprieve, Brad calmly gathered his things while George sat in his chair, staring at nothing in particular. The studio had fallen into an uncomfortable silence, broken only by the whispered conversations of crew members trying to process what they had just witnessed. "This has been absolutely surreal," Brad said to no one in particular as he prepared to leave. "I've done thousands of interviews over the years, but I've never encountered anything quite like this." Security approached hesitantly, clearly uncomfortable with the situation they'd been thrust into. Brad waved them off with a polite smile. "Don't worry, gentlemen. I'm leaving voluntarily. I wouldn't want to be associated with whatever this was supposed to be." As Brad Pitt walked off the Good Morning America set for what would certainly be the last time, he left behind a host whose career had just imploded on live television, a production team scrambling to contain the fallout, and millions of viewers who had witnessed one of the most bizarre and unprofessional moments in broadcasting history. The man who had tried to destroy Hollywood's golden boy had instead revealed himself to be everything he had accused his guest of: being petty, vindictive, and completely divorced from reality. George Stephanopoulos remained in his chair as the commercial break continued, the weight of his professional suicide settling in around him like a suffocating blanket. In trying to take down Brad Pitt, he had instead taken down himself, and everyone in the studio knew that morning television would never be quite the same again. What do you think really motivated George Stephanopoulos to launch such an unprovoked attack on one of Hollywood's most respected actors? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe for more shocking stories from the world of entertainment. The truth behind this confrontation might be even more disturbing than what we witnessed on live television.